The smell of turned soil still clung to my jeans as I sat in the stiff-backed leather chair, staring across the polished oak desk at the lawyer, who had just shattered everything I believed in. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said again, softer this time. "But according to the signed documents, the farm now belongs to your cousin Ryan." My ears buzzed. The words echoed as if I were underwater. The farm. My aunt's legacy. My whole life. I had poured myself into those acres, waking up before dawn to tend the orchard, fighting through droughts, debts, and storm damage alongside Aunt Miriam. And now, just like that, it was gone. I gripped the edge of the seat to steady myself. Ryan hadn't even bothered to show up for her funeral. He breezed in 2 weeks later with a new haircut, a smug smile, and legal papers that looked too clean, too recent. The family, desperate for order, accepted his version of the truth without question. And now the law had to. Outside the lawyer's office, the late autumn wind shook the last dry leaves from the oak trees. I had never felt so hollow. But I didn't cry, because tucked inside my coat pocket was something no one else knew about, a yellowing envelope with Aunt Miriam's familiar script. I had found it hidden beneath the floorboards of her sewing room the night before. "Claire, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong." Her words burned into my mind. She had feared this. She had prepared. And inside that letter was the truth. The kind that didn't just take back what was mine. It would ruin Ryan, and change our entire family forever. Grief is strange, it makes time stretch, and contract in uneven ways. For the week after Aunt Miriam's funeral, I moved through the motions in a daze. I fed the chickens, trimmed the pear trees like she taught me, and watered the violets she kept on the windowsill. It helped me feel like she was still with me somehow. Then Ryan showed up. He pulled into the driveway in a shiny black SUV, one of those cars that looked out of place on our dirt road. His sunglasses stayed on even as he hugged me stiffly, and he didn't even glance at the flower bed Aunt Miriam had loved. "I came to help with the estate stuff," he said, flashing a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "You must be exhausted." At first, I tried to be civil. We hadn't spoken in years, not really, but Aunt Miriam had always said, "Family's family," even when they forget how to act like it. I offered him tea. He declined. He never did like anything that wasn't bottled or branded. It wasn't until 2 days later that the mask slipped. He called a family meeting in the farmhouse living room, where Aunt Miriam's quilt still draped over the sofa. My mom and a few uncles came. Everyone seemed confused, but curious. Ryan cleared his throat, placed a sleek black folder on the coffee table, and began, "I have the transfer papers. Aunt Miriam signed over the farm to me months ago, when she realized she needed someone with a real plan." Silence. I stared at the documents as if they were written in another language. Her signature, crooked, weak, was there in black ink, next to a date that sent chills down my spine. "That's not possible," I said. That week, she couldn't even get out of bed. I was feeding her soup with a drawer. "She was clearer than you give her credit for," Ryan replied smoothly. "She told me she wanted me to carry on her legacy, in a more productive direction." He passed the papers around as if it were already settled. My mother hesitated, her lips trembling. My uncle scratched his head. No one looked at me. "But I've been running the farm," I said, my voice rising. "For 7 years. Ryan hasn't even stepped foot on this land since college." "I'm sorry, Claire," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is a shock. But she made her choice." It felt like being erased. All those years, every blister, every sleepless frost warning, every sunrise Aunt Miriam and I had watched together from the porch swing, reduced to a footnote. Still, I tried to fight it. I called the lawyer, demanded a review. But the documents had all the appearances of legitimacy. Witnessed. Stamped. Filed. The family, uncomfortable with conflict, sided with Ryan out of convenience. By week's end, the locks had been changed on the main barn. A man I didn't recognize came by to survey the land for future development. When I asked him what that meant, he shrugged and said, "I think they're planning some kind of resort retreat. Yoga classes and goat milk or something." That night, I packed a small bag, stared at the farmhouse for one last time, and drove away before dawn. I didn't cry. Not until I opened the glove box, and found Aunt Miriam's handkerchief still folded neatly where she used to keep it. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just taken the farm. He had stolen her voice. And that, I knew in my bones, could not be the end of this story. I moved into a tiny apartment above a closed bakery downtown. It was musty and smelled like flour and old sugar, but the landlady was kind, and it was all I could afford. Every morning, I still woke at 5 a.m. out of habit. I had nothing to tend to, but my body didn't seem to realize the farm was no longer mine. The news spread quickly in town. Claire lost the farm. Ryan was restructuring. Most people didn't know what to say. A few gave me pitying looks when I walked past the farmer's market. Others whispered. I hated it. Not just the loss, the silence, the helplessness, the sudden erasure of who I had been for 7 years. Miriam's right hand, the girl with the dirt-stained jeans, and a plan to restore the orchard by grafting heritage pear varieties, gone like I never mattered. It wasn't until a week later, when I returned to the farmhouse one last time to collect a few keepsakes, that I found it. The sky had turned pale gray by the time I stepped into Miriam's sewing room. The door creaked. The scent of lavender and cedar clung to the air, and her old Singer machine sat exactly where she left it. Thread still looped through the needle. A stack of neatly folded aprons waited in the corner. I don't know why I bent down near the baseboard. Maybe instinct. Maybe grief nudging me like a whisper. But one floorboard, third from the wall, had always creaked differently than the others. I pried it loose with the screwdriver I kept in my glove box. Underneath, wrapped in wax paper and tied with twine, was a small bundle. My heart thudded. Inside, a letter. Faded envelope. My name in Aunt Miriam's delicate cursive. Claire. Open this only if something has gone terribly wrong. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Dearest girl, she began, if you are reading this, then I fear I didn't make it in time. I tried to trust the system, to file things properly, but I knew Ryan. I knew what he might attempt. My stomach twisted. He is not who he pretends to be. He's clever, and he's angry. I raised him out of duty, not out of love. That truth weighs on me more than I can say. I read the rest slowly, each sentence a drop of oil onto a smoldering fire inside me. She had suspected Ryan would forge her signature. She had become wary in her final months, and though too weak to fight directly, she left behind what she called her last roots, a trail that only I would think to follow. Claire, the farm was always meant for you. I told the lawyer once. But just in case, find Mrs. Deering. She knows what I couldn't say aloud. And if you must fight, fight smart. I know you will. The final line was underlined twice. Your strength was never in what you said, but in how you listened, and how you never gave up, even when no one was watching. For the first time since the betrayal, I cried. But not out of grief. Out of fury. Out of hope. Because I had a letter. I had a name. And I had truth on my side. Mrs. Deering lived on the edge of town, in a faded blue house with ivy clinging to its front porch like a secret. She'd been Aunt Miriam's closest friend, her quilting partner, her Sunday soup buddy, and, I learned, her not-so-secret witness to everything Ryan hoped would stay buried. When I showed her the letter, she gasped and pressed a trembling hand to her lips. She said you might come, Mrs. Deering whispered. She never trusted that boy, not after what happened with his father. That made me pause. What happened with his father? Mrs. Deering looked away. That's not my story to tell. But Miriam kept records. Everything. Her lawyer didn't act because, well, he's also Ryan's godfather. I felt my stomach drop. Of course. That's how the documents passed inspection so easily. That's how the property was transferred without even a phone call to me. Ryan had corrupted the legal pathway through family favors and blind loyalties. She gave me copies, Mrs. Deering said, standing up slowly. Bank statements. Health records. Even a video. The flash drive she handed me was small and unassuming, but when I plugged it into my laptop that night, the screen lit up with something electric. Aunt Miriam, pale but lucid, speaking into the camera. If you're watching this, I need you to know, I never signed those transfer papers. I couldn't. My hand was too weak. I was in the hospital that entire week, and Ryan knew it. I think he had someone forge it. I believe he's planning to sell the land to a developer. But the orchard, the old well, there's something under it, something tied to our family legacy. That land isn't just soil, it holds truth, and it belongs with Claire. My breath caught in my throat. She was right. The old well, the one Ryan had always called a hazard when we were kids, was protected under historical landmark status, a detail I'd discovered years ago when doing restoration research. Anything built over or near it, without specific approval, would violate state law. Ryan had probably never known. Or he forgot. Or worse, he thought he could buy his way out of it. This was no longer just a family betrayal. It was a legal one. A historical one. And possibly criminal. Armed with the letter, the video, and the documents Mrs. Deering provided, I returned to town hall. I requested public records on the deed transfer. I visited the county clerk, recorded statements, and, quietly, retained a legal intern at the local university's free legal aid clinic. She was sharp, young, and hated corruption with a passion. We filed a formal complaint with the State Land Registry. Then another, with the Historical Preservation Society. 2 weeks later, the first blow landed. Ryan's construction permit was suspended. The townspeople started whispering again, but this time, their looks weren't pitying. They were curious. Respectful. One afternoon, the newspaper ran a small column. Family farm sale challenged amid forgery allegations. Local woman claims elder abuse, misappropriation. It was no longer just me versus Ryan. It was me, and Miriam's truth, against a system that had looked the other way. And suddenly, Ryan wasn't just the cousin who betrayed me. He was a man standing on a fault line, and I was the one with the map. For once, I wasn't rushing. Every move had to be deliberate. Ryan was arrogant, but not stupid. If I wanted to outmaneuver him, I couldn't just scream injustice. I had to make the system scream for me. The first step, public visibility. I met with Leela, the local legal aid intern, at the public library where her mentor, a semi-retired attorney named Mr. Harlow, volunteered twice a week. He reviewed Aunt Miriam's video, the forged papers, and the land history with quiet intensity. When he spoke, it was with conviction. There's enough here for a fraud investigation, and if this well is registered under the State Historical Register, then any development plans would require unanimous community review. Ryan didn't do that. He didn't even file the impact paperwork. With their help, I filed for an emergency injunction to halt any structural changes on the farm, citing potential environmental and historical violations. We also submitted a motion to unseal the notarization log from the week Ryan claimed Miriam signed the documents. If no notary ever witnessed her signature, the deed transfer could be ruled invalid. But I needed more than court filings. I needed people. So I went to the farmer's market. I stood behind the folding table Aunt Miriam and I used to sell preserves. I passed out photocopies of the historical documentation, framed everything through the lens of legacy. Did you know this orchard has been here since 1873? I hosted a small community gathering, nothing fancy. Just lemonade, old photos, and storytelling. But I shared the letter. And the video. And it spread. By the next week, the local paper did a full feature. Farm Feud uncovers deeper family rift, beloved aunt's legacy at risk. The article went viral in nearby counties. A historical farming blogger picked it up. Soon, the State Agricultural Society offered to launch an independent review of the land's transfer. Then came the anonymous tip. A call to my prepaid number late at night. I used to work for Ryan. At his firm. The notary you're looking for. She never signed those documents. I was there. He paid someone. You'll find her name on a side project. They claimed it was for a land lease, but it was the same day. The next morning, Leela and I pulled every business filing under Ryan's name from the last 6 months. Buried in the appendix of one innocuous lease agreement was a name, Samantha Cordell, a notary, out of state, temporarily contracted for one job. When I called her, she cracked in 10 minutes. She never saw Aunt Miriam. She was paid to confirm the documents after the fact. She had no idea she was involved in something illegal, until now. She sent me an affidavit. With that, Mr. Harlow helped us prepare for the hearing. I wore one of Aunt Miriam's old blouses, the pale green one with tiny embroidered daisies. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt calm. Not because I was certain of the outcome, but because I knew I wasn't walking in alone. Miriam was with me. So were the people of the town. And most importantly, so was the truth. The courtroom was packed, but it wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was the entire town watching a family secret explode in the harsh light of truth. Ryan sat at the defendant's table, his sharp suit now feeling like armor cracking under pressure. His usual smug smile was gone, replaced by a flicker of something darker, fear, or maybe desperation. The judge called the hearing to order. Mr. Harlow opened with a steady voice, laying out the evidence methodically: the forged signature, Aunt Miriam's video testimony, the affidavit from the notary Samantha Cordell, and the documented failure to comply with historic preservation laws. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart. I lost more than a farm that day, I said, voice steady but raw. I lost the place that connected me to my family, to my heritage, and to the woman who believed in me when no one else did. This isn't just about property. It's about justice for Aunt Miriam, and for everyone she loved. Ryan's lawyer sneered, trying to paint me as an opportunist, a woman bitter over losing an inheritance. But then came the surprise twist. A local journalist, seated in the back, stood and asked to submit new evidence, a series of emails between Ryan and the county clerk, showing a pattern of influence and intimidation to fast-track the transfer and block inquiries. The judge raised an eyebrow but accepted the documents. Ryan's face paled. He faltered when questioned about these emails. "You were supposed to be family," I said quietly, locking eyes with him. "But you traded our trust for quick money." Ryan's face finally shattered. He slumped defeated. "I never thought you'd fight like this," he muttered. "Neither did I said. "But Aunt Miriam taught me one thing: strength isn't loud. It's patient. It's steady. And it doesn't give up." After hours of testimony, cross-examinations, and mounting evidence, the judge announced the verdict: the deed transfer was declared null and void due to fraud and forgery. The farm was legally mine once again. Ryan was ordered to pay fines for the violation of historical preservation laws, and face further investigation for potential criminal charges. The courtroom erupted, some with tears, others with applause. I looked out at the crowd, feeling a wave of relief and vindication wash over me. Miriam's legacy was safe. And so was mine. The morning after the verdict felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream, one where fear and betrayal had clouded everything, only to be lifted by truth and justice. Back on the farm, I stood at the edge of the orchard, sunlight filtering through the budding leaves. The air smelled of fresh earth and hope. Neighbors had come by the day before to help clear the fallen branches and repaint the fence. The local newspaper ran the headline I never dared to imagine: "Family Farm Restored, Truth Prevails Over Treachery." But this victory wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming myself. Aunt Miriam's letter, the secret she entrusted to me, wasn't just evidence, it was a reminder. She believed in me when I doubted myself. I wasn't just the farmer's niece, who lost her inheritance. I was a strategist, a fighter, a guardian of a legacy centuries old. Word came from the State Historical Preservation Society that they would officially designate the orchard as a protected landmark, ensuring no developer could ever threaten it again. Even Ryan, now under formal investigation, had to publicly apologize at the town hall meeting. His arrogance had been his undoing. But the true surprise came a week later. Mrs. Deering invited me over for tea and handed me a small, locked wooden box. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, was a set of old journals, Aunt Miriam's. Pages filled with stories of our family's hardships, triumphs, and secrets stretching back generations. And at the very last page, a simple note. The farm was never just soil and trees. It is the heart of our family. Guard it well, Claire. I smiled through tears. I had fought for the land. But in the end, I had found something far greater, my roots, my strength, and my future. And that no one could ever take away.